South Africa secures $474.6 million AFDB loan for energy transition. The EU and the US agree trade deal with 15% tariffs for European exports to America. And Iran confirms IAEA visit in next 2 weeks. Welcome to the Economic Bulletin with Mihala Al-Hamalawi, and we start off with Europe, where rents are skyrocketing across the continent, creating a major hurdle for immigrants. A new report from Deutsche Bank revealed that London is the priciest city for a 3-bedroom apartment, while Athens offers the most affordable rates. Since 2020, rent inflation has been steep, particularly in southern and eastern Europe, with Istanbul seeing a staggering 206% increase. Immigrants are advised to carefully assess housing affordability and income prospects before relocating, as some traditionally affordable regions are no longer so. The European Investment Bank Group has opened a new country office in Belgium, reinforcing its commitment to supporting sustainable growth and strategic financing. Located in Brussels and led by Torsten Brandt, the office aims to deepen the European Investment Bank Group's engagement and boost investment in key areas like green energy, infrastructure, innovation, and digital development. Since 1962, the European Investment Bank Group has already committed 44.5 billion euros to various Belgian projects. Still in Europe, British retail sales fell for the 10th consecutive month in July 2025 as rising prices continue to hit consumers. A Confederation of British Industry survey showed the decline eased slightly from June, but demand remains weak. According to the Confederation, elevated price pressures driven by rising labor costs and economic uncertainty are weighing on household spending. While online sales saw a marginal rise, the overall trend reflects a 3.6% inflation rate impacting households. Britain's Office for National Statistics reports that public sector productivity grew by 1% in the first quarter of 2025, marking its fastest annual rate in 2 years. This is an improvement from the 0.8% growth in late 2024 and the quickest pace since the first quarter of 2023. However, productivity remains 4.2% below pre-pandemic levels, with the health service notably lagging. This ongoing shortfall means the public is effectively paying more for the same services, adding pressure to government budgets. In global relations, France has become the first Paris Club creditor to sign a bilateral debt relief agreement with Ghana, a crucial step in the West African nation's ongoing debt restructuring efforts. This landmark deal shows, or rather follows, Ghana's default on external debt due to unsustainable levels. Ghana's finance minister, Cassiel Atto, called it a milestone that paves the way for other creditors to follow. The agreement is vital for Ghana's IMF-backed recovery program. With Ghana's public debt over 90% of GDP and recent inflation dropping from 54% to 13.7%, officials are optimistic that other nations, including China, will swiftly finalize their own agreements. Moving on to the dark continent, South Africa and the African Development Bank have signed a $474.6 million loan agreement to back the country's Just Energy Transition JET initiative. This financing part of a broader development effort, also involving the World Bank and others, aims to boost energy security, accelerate decarbonization, and create jobs by supporting critical reforms in the energy and transport sectors. The loan comes with favorable terms, including a 15-year maturity. In Asia, Bank Negara Malaysia has revised its 2025 GDP growth forecast downward to 4.0%, 4.6% from 4.5%, 5.5%, citing heightened global trade tensions and economic uncertainties. Governor Daud Siri emphasized the central bank's cautious stance in response to shifting international dynamics, particularly the U.S. tariff policies under Trump's administration. He added that the sustained strength in economic activity and moderate inflation provides a supportive environment to pursue structural reforms for a more resilient and competitive Malaysia in the future. In the United States, President Donald Trump strongly urged the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. Trump compared U.S. rates to lower ones in Europe and claimed a cut would save the U.S. economy hundreds of billions of dollars. He concluded a smart person would cut.
In Europe, they had 11 cuts. In other places, they had 10 or 11 cuts. And we had none, but I'm not going to say anything bad. You know, we're doing so well, even without the rate cut. With the rate cut, it would be better. It affects our housing a little bit. Look, we should be 3 points lower. Each point is $360 billion. Can you imagine that? That's big numbers. Each point, 1 point of cut, is the equivalent of $360 billion in savings.
Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully take office of President of the United States.
Capitol opened the American and reciprocity. Mexico. Canada. Greenland.
The United States and the European Union have agreed to a framework trade deal ending months of standoff, announced by President Donald Trump after talks with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in Scotland. The agreement includes a 15% U.S. tariff on most EU goods, half the 30% rate Trump had threatened. In return, the EU has committed to significantly increasing its purchases of U.S. energy, totaling $750 billion over the next 3 years, and boosting its overall investment in the U.S. by an additional $600 billion. This also includes an agreement for the EU to buy more U.S. military equipment. While some sectors like aircraft will see zero tariffs, steel and aluminum tariffs remain at 50% for now.
Going to agree to invest into the United States.
This agreement has sparked denunciation among members of the bloc, with Germany's Industry Association, or the BDI, criticizing the deal, saying that it was not a good day for German and wider European industry. The BDI board member Wolfgang stated that the new trade deal is a blow to the country's bottom line and significantly harms profits due to unprecedented tariff levels. He added that avoiding an escalation of the trade conflict and having mitigating effects for some industries was good, but noted that the deal still sent a bad signal for the future trade order. He believed that the outcome was unavoidable for EU negotiators and marked the start of a new world trade order with the terminal tariffs. French Prime Minister François Bayrou has joined several cabinet ministers in criticizing the recently announced EU-US trade deal between EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen and President Donald Trump. Bayrou highlighted that it is a somber day when an alliance of free peoples brought together to affirm their common values and to defend their common interests resigns itself to submission. French European Affairs Minister Benjamin Haddad has noted that the agreement will bring temporary stability, but it is unbalanced. Other French ministers have slammed the deal too, including the European Affairs Minister and the Industry Minister, who added that more needed to be done in terms of rebalancing the EU trade relations with the US. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has stated that the trade agreement between the United States and the European Union is worse than the deal reached by the United Kingdom and the US earlier in the month. Additionally, he criticized the agreement, adding that Trump ate von der Leyen for breakfast.
Ráadásul van az a probléma, hogy általában arról állapodtak meg, hogy több száz milliárd eurónyi tőkét visznek az európaiak Amerikába. De ki? A bizottságnak nincs tőkéje. Kinek a nevében állapodott meg? A német kancellár fogja odavinni azt a pénzt? Vagy a francia elnök, vagy a magyar miniszterelnök fog majd tőkét küldeni Amerikába? Hogy van ez elgondolva? Tehát ezt nem látom. A másik, hogy általában fegyvereket fogunk venni. Több száz milliárd dollárért, de ki? Mert a bizottságnak nincs hadsereg, ő nem tud venni fegyvert. Ki fogja azt megvenni?
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez voiced unenthusiastic support for the EU-US trade deal, acknowledging the Commission's efforts. Sánchez, however, called for the European Union to expand its commercial partnerships with Mercosur, Indonesia and India in response to the tariff war with the United States.
After a few months of ongoing negotiation, the just-announced EU-US trade agreement has sparked deep factional rifts across Europe. Far from uniting the continent, the deal has exposed divisions within political ranks, industry sectors, and public opinion. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described the agreement as an imperfect yet necessary compromise, providing stability and predictability with a 15% all-inclusive tariff on most EU exports to the US, a reduction from a threatened 30% tariff. Irish and Finnish officials echoed this damage control narrative, emphasizing the need to avoid further escalation. The deal exempts certain strategic sectors like aircraft and parts, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductor equipment from tariffs, but steel and aluminum tariffs remain fixed at 50%. The EU also pledged to buy $750 billion in US energy and increase investments in US military equipment. However, the agreement triggered powerful criticism. French Prime Minister François Bayrou called it a dark day and submission to US interests, while other French officials described it as an unbalanced commercial surrender threatening European exporters and manufacturers. German industry groups warned of the deal as an existential threat to European businesses. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban commented that Donald Trump did not reach an agreement with Ursula von der Leyen, but rather Donald Trump ate Ursula von der Leyen for breakfast, calling Trump a heavyweight negotiator and accusing the EU of accepting worse terms than the UK.
And for further analysis, we're joined from Barcelona by Director of the EU-ASEAN Center and former World Bank advisor, Mr. Meher Nicholas Frizzley. Welcome to Qnews Economic Bulletin. Now, Mr. Meher, how has the recently announced EU-US trade agreement sparked factional rifts within the European political ranks, industries, and public opinion?
I'm glad to join you live from Barcelona, where I've just arrived. And actually, to describe the situation, I would use as a metaphor a term which was coined in the 1920s by French and Spanish painters and poets, which is surreal. And that school of thought was called back in the days surrealism. So it means beyond unbelievable. So when something is beyond unbelievable, crazy, ridiculous, You call it surreal, beyond reality. So today, the French Prime Minister, François Bayrou, said it was a sad day for freedom and democracy and that Europe was humiliated. And many ministers who are members of President Macron's own inner circle, including, Benjamin Haddad and Jean-Noël Barrot, right? So respectively, the Minister for European Union Affairs, Haddad, and Barrot, the foreign minister, they both said they were horrified, and they both said it was a dark day for democracy. Why am I saying it's surreal and ridiculous? It's because these guys, Macron, Bayrou, Barrot, and company, they are hardcore supporters of Ursula von der Leyen. In the past 7 years, every time a French industrial, so every time a French industry leader, every time the CEO of a big French exporting company or a high-tech company dared criticize Ursula von der Leyen, Bayrou and Macron insulted him, and they said he was a traitor and that France needed to abide by the rules of European Union solidarity.
Democracy, indeed.
Yeah, and what did we get? What did the poor French get for all the sacrifices they made in the past 7 years on the altar of that supreme European Union solidarity? What they got yesterday in Aberdeen, Scotland, they were stabbed in the back. So without any hesitation, like a cold animal, at 6 p.m. UK time yesterday, Ursula von der Leyen stabbed France in the back, and she signed that deal with Trump. Now, bravo Trump. Trump is not a bad guy, unlike what the Europeans say. Trump is only defending his own country.
Exactly.
So I wish
his own interests, his country's interests.
Yeah, Trump is very fiercely, very cynically, but who cares? He's defending the interests of the American working class and the CEOs of American high-tech and industrial companies. Bravo, it's his job. But sadly, in Europe, we don't have the same sort of fiercely focused pro-business ethos, and we have internal betrayals, because once again, the French government for the past 5, 6, 7, 8 years, under the supervision of people like Bayrou or Barrot or Macron, they made a lot of sacrifice, telling the French voters and telling the CEOs of big French companies, don't worry, later on, we will get, we'll reap the fruits, the sacrifices we're making today will be rewarded. And not only the sacrifices French companies and French workers did in the past 7 years were never rewarded, they got stabbed in the back. So clearly, there's something in strategy, in corporate strategy, but it's used also in military strategy, right? So when you are weak, when you are visibly weak, and when the other party, the party with whom you are negotiating, be he a friend or a rival or an enemy, sometimes you negotiate with enemies, sometimes you negotiate with allies, it doesn't matter.
Yes.
When the other party knows that you are weak and disorganized and incompetent, like Ursula von der Leyen, where they can smell the weakness, and someone like President Trump, he has the animal instinct to smell the weakness. Exactly. So he negotiated with Ursula von der Leyen based on a very simple philosophy. And Trump's philosophy when bargaining with poor Ursula is the following: what is mine, what is yours is negotiable. And that's exactly what happened.
Exactly. That was the basis of the negotiations. So how do the criticisms from officials in France, Germany, and Hungary actually reflect broader concerns over Europe's negotiating power and economic independence?
Well, clearly it's a betrayal. Once again, if you are American, it's great. And so Trump did everything perfectly, smartly, and efficiently. He maximized, we say in game theory and economics, he optimized. So what Trump got is the optimal, the best possible outcome. You have outcome A, B, C, D, you have like 10, 20, 30 different outcomes. What Trump got yesterday night in Aberdeen, Scotland, was the best imaginable possible outcome for the US economy. What the European got is the worst possible outcome. So normally when two big powers negotiate, you reach what is called a middle-of-the-road solution.
Exactly.
And Ursula von der Leyen and Macron, they always say, oh, we are a superpower. So when you listen to, Macron...
And that would be the definition of a win-win situation. A win-win situation means compromises by each group, but not one party or one group eating up the other and achieving the maximum benefit. Yes,
especially when supposedly the two players negotiating are roughly of the same size. So the Europeans, especially people like Bayrou, Macron, and von der Leyen, they always say, oh, we are a superpower. Exactly. We are bigger than the US. And when the moment came for them to show their cards, they yielded under pressure. And it's really horrible because for the future of European tech, for the future of European high-tech industry, it is a disaster because the biggest concession Trump got from them is now they agreed in writing in the next 2-3 years to force French, German, Italian industrial companies to invest $900 billion in the US.
Well, I get your point, Mr. Meher, but now, and I'd like to thank you so much, but now we move to Egypt's representative speech at the Two-State Solution Conference.
To establish a Palestinian state on the 4 June 1967 lines with East Jerusalem as its capital, a state living in peace and security side by side with Israel. Here, Egypt, and through its participation in the co-chairmanship of the Fifth Working Group alongside the United Kingdom, we took care to incorporate all the contributions received and formulate them with the utmost balance between all the different visions, while presenting our own vision with regards to the disastrous humanitarian situation in the occupied territories, be they in the West Bank or the Gaza Strip. This is a vision that we believe has won the acceptance and support of the majority of the countries participating in the Humanitarian Action Working Group as one of the main pillars of any practical action aimed at providing the objective conditions necessary for the establishment of a Palestinian state, which is based on supporting the steadfastness of the Palestinian people on their land in light of the rights guaranteed to them by international law and international humanitarian law, foremost of which is the protection and enjoyment of basic services, at the forefront of which is the right to life and the right to unfettered humanitarian aid. Therefore, Egypt has intensified its efforts to put an end to the war in Gaza and to put an end to the humanitarian catastrophe that civilians are subjected to by allowing the resumption of humanitarian aid to Gaza, where Egypt is one of the major contributors of this humanitarian aid, and we are working with our brethren in Qatar and friends in the United States to achieve this. Egypt has continued to support the efforts of UNRWA in Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories and the rest of its areas of operation by maintaining the mandate granted to the agency by the United Nations General Assembly or its work throughout the occupied Palestinian territories. Egypt reaffirms its intention to cooperate with international partners and to organize a conference for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip as soon as a ceasefire agreement is reached. This aims to implement the Arab-Islamic Plan for Early Recovery and Reconstruction. The implementation of this plan would contribute to ending the humanitarian crisis that the people of Gaza are experiencing quickly and effectively after more than 20 months of brutal aggression. Egypt provides security training programs to the Palestinian Authority's forces so that they would be able to enforce the law in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank in a manner in cooperation with Jordan. This training would contribute to the creation of an environment that would allow for the establishment of a contiguous Palestinian state. And here we welcome the announcement by French President Macron, a courageous announcement of France's recognition of the State of Palestine in September, and we call upon all international parties to do the same. Let us together save the two-state solution by recognizing the Palestinian state and by not giving the veto to one party here. In closing, we'd like to express our sincere gratitude to the co-chairs of the conference and to the United Kingdom for the excellent coordination with Egypt in presiding over the working group on humanitarian action and reconstruction. And we thank all the countries and organizations that have contributed effectively to this effort through their valuable proposals. We wish this conference success, and we hope that together we will succeed in putting an end to this humanitarian disaster that has not been witnessed since World War II. The starvation and the systemic killing, the use of hunger as a weapon of war, of collective punishment, and a blatant violation of international law and international humanitarian law. I thank you.
أشكر معالي وزير خارجية جمهورية.
I thank Egypt for their remarks. I give the floor now to the Vice Minister for the Middle East and North Africa of the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have just seen the speech by Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdel-Ati before the two-state solution conference, where he announced that Egypt intensifies efforts to end the war on Gaza and to deliver humanitarian aid. He also said that Egypt supports UNRWA work in the Palestinian territories and that Egypt works with international partners on the reconstruction of Gaza once a ceasefire is reached. He also said that Egypt supports the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the PLO, that will lead to a two-state solution. Abdel-Ati hailed French President Emmanuel Macron's, according to what he described, courageous recognition of Palestine, and said that if such recognition was followed by other countries, that will lead to the two-state solution. Resuming our economic bulletin, Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Ismail Baqai has stated that the International Atomic Energy Agency will make a visit to Iran within the next 2 weeks. Baqai noted that a manual regarding the future of Iran's cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency will be presented based on a recent parliamentary bill restricting such cooperation. Oil prices rose 2% on Monday after a trade deal between the United States and the European Union and U.S. President Donald Trump's announcement that he would shorten the deadline for Russia to end its war in Ukraine or face sanctions. Brent crude futures were up 2% at $69.8 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude rose 2% at $66.49. Meanwhile, gold fell to a near 3-week low on Monday as the U.S.-European Union trade accord lifted the dollar and risk sentiment, while investors awaited fresh cues on rate policy from this week's Federal Reserve meeting. Spot gold fell 1% to $3,304.87 per ounce, touching its lowest level since July the 9th. U.S. gold futures were down 0.6% at $3,320 per ounce. The U.S. dollar index rose to a once-week high, making bullion more expensive for overseas buyers. And that brings us to the end of our economic bulletin, and here is what we have been covering. Transition. The EU and the US agreed trade deal with 15% tariffs for European exports to America. And Iran confirms IAEA visit in next 2 weeks. Well, this concludes our economic bulletin. I'm Halal Hamalawi. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EG to stay informed. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.